welcome to Series 2 of my podcast Innovation, where we get to hear stories and experiences of some incredible women in science and technology. Not only will you get insights into some fascinating innovations, but you may also even relate to their stories, especially if you're a little unconventional or non-conforming. As with all science and technology, what these women do for a living has a real impact on all of our lives, and we often don't realise it. But here on Innovation, I'm also giving women a platform for them to be heard and for us to be inspired and uplifted by what they've learned along their life's journeys, both personally and professionally. This week I talked to Nikita Hari, an electrical and electronics engineer.
I'm Dr. Nikita Hari. I'm an electrical and electronics engineer, and I aspire to inspire youngsters to engineer a better world. And I'm currently working on designing an inclusive, innovative, and transformational engineering learning model to develop well-rounded engineers.
I think we're very aligned in what we're trying to achieve, having done engineering and now in the work that we're doing. How are you trying to change the public perception of engineering?
I'm very passionate about engineering, and at some point in your life, you realize, you look around and you see all these barriers, challenges, not just for women and minorities. It's also in general, globally, there is this really wrong understanding of engineer as someone who just fixes things, and moving forward being such a, our society being very complicated and complex, I thought it is important for me as an engineer to help change that perception. And from doing outreach with schools, talking to students of all ranges, be it from primary to secondary and moving on to university students, I interact with at least thousands of students every year to try and get them to understand what real engineering is, by drawing them into my journey and the journeys of engineers across the globe. So getting that millions of possibilities of engineering to the general public, starting from sowing the seeds of those thoughts in the young minds, I think is the way to move forward. Having said that, to change anything, it is very important that you are able to make that impact on society through policy and so on and so forth. So I try and I work with Royal Academy of Engineering. I'm a Queen Elizabeth Prize in Engineering Ambassador and Council member and Research and Innovation Chair and so on and so forth. So I try and get talk and network and connect and with people where I feel like I can make an impact.
Tell me about your engineering journey then. Like, how did it begin?
I think my engineering journey began as a kid. I've always loved playing and making stuff and so on and so forth. Also, it was very organic in the sense that I would say I was a kid in love with physics and maths and making stuff and being in an electrical engineering business household. Engineering came very natural to me when I had to decide what I wanted to pursue as a profession, as a degree. And I decided to take up my 4-year of undergraduate degree in engineering, and because of that reason in electrical and electronics engineering. But during the course of my studies, I thought again, because I'm in an industrial household, I thought I wanted to do a management degree, and so engineering plus management and get into the family entrepreneurial pursuit and so on and so forth. But then I realized that at that point, I realized I did not have much aptitude for it when I was in my father's company, for example. It did not strike me as to, it did not come naturally to me as to what to change there to make things better and so on and so forth. So I, along with my other people or mentors who advised me, because I was an academically inclined kid, right? I was always on top of the class and so on and so forth. Everyone said, why don't you just continue with your studies? Because that seems like your thing. So I went and did a 2 years of master's specializing in power electronics. And it was during that time, during that second year of my master's, that I realized I had an aptitude for research. And I've always loved teaching, right? I am that kid who came back from school and who would teach the teddy bears and who would want to correct some of the things that, as in like correct the style or delivery that suits me. Thinking back about how the teacher did it. But I never wanted to pursue it as a career back then. Now, after my master's, during my master's, I actually started formally teaching as doing guest lecturing and so on and so forth. And by the time I finished my master's, I joined as a lecturer at the National Institute of Technology, India, preparing parallelly for my PhD admissions. And I got, I applied, I got into Cambridge, and even while I was at Cambridge, I was teaching and so on and so forth. But it was during Cambridge times, I realized that I loved being in an entrepreneurial space. So that aptitude came, or I realized, or let's say the entrepreneurial spirit in me got kindled while I was at Cambridge. I went on to start 2 educational tech startups and so on and so forth, because I realized I loved being with people having the same vision, but sharing that vision, but having complementary skill sets and so on. And it was also during that time frame at the University of Cambridge that I started to realize how passionate I was about engineering and the need to make people understand the importance of engineering. And I started using the opportunities around me to build an inclusive and, let's say, attractive landscape for engineering. And as I moved on, I realized I was developing an intersectional expertise and experience, bringing those fields of engineering, entrepreneurship, and research together. And while I was finishing my PhD, I applied for my fellowships, and I wanted a fellowship which gave me the freedom to do not just research and entrepreneurship, but also outreach and public engagement and so on and so forth. So I moved on to University of Oxford for my Faculty for Future Fellowship. And it was during that time I came across the institute, the Dyson Institute, and I realized it would probably be the perfect opportunity to bring together my intersectional interest, inter and multidisciplinary interest. And it also just like goes back to that kid. When I said I was interested in maths and physics, I was also someone who was a topper for social sciences, right? But I never knew how to bring my interest for understanding history and appreciation for it and physics together. But it's like life coming full circle, wherein I organically started integrating myself into the world of policy and into the world of sustainability and so on and so forth. So now I sit in that intersectional and interdisciplinary space wherein I bring together the educational, the enterprise, the research and innovation, all within the arena of outreach and public engagement.
So I see your career as a kind of Venn diagram where there's the engineering and then there's the educational side. Can you tell me more about the engineering? Like if I was to have been a fly on the wall during your engineering days, like what would you have been doing?
Yeah, so as an engineer, so I started off as a research and development engineer looking into the electrical or electronics bits of how things work before I started my master's journey and got more into formal research and so on and so forth. So as an engineer, I would be, it depends on a particular day, sitting as the, let's say, a year back or so as a director of research and development, I would look into what's going on with the product, what changes should be made, and so on and so forth. Or just to put it in a bit more umbrella term, it's when you start off as an engineer, you are very hands-on, you were doing stuff, you're trying to make and build and break. I think it is always make, build, break, and make back better. So it's always about whatever be the field of engineering I was in, or whatever different landscapes I move around. I think as an engineer, I bring that skill of trying to define a problem and solve it, a complex problem. So that's what I do on a daily basis. Like, there are problems in the world, there are problems that need solving, but the first and foremost thing for an engineer and my skill set is essentially in defining it, finding different ways of trying to solve it, putting that into a proper structure, understanding the implications of it, and solving it. And in my case, since I'm an electrical and electronics engineer, the problems are always based on how best to get better power out of your phones, out of your laptops, or in very simple words, we all think of electricity as something that's coming out of the wall outlets and powering any of our electrical or electronic device. So as an engineer, I sit and make and break and blow up and build back to make this world run on better power.
What exactly in engineering were you doing?
When our phones or laptops work, if you touch them, you feel the heat, right? It becomes hot. Now that's because the electricity is being, or a percentage, a part of electricity is being lost as heat. We talk about energy usage, the spiraling energy demands, and so on and so forth, and always about different sources of energy and producing more and more energy every single day. But just think about it. We have so many devices around us in our homes and so on and so forth. And we lose almost on an average 10% of heat every time we use them. So just imagine each of us using all these devices and in general. So it's not just about the energy lost, it's also about billions of amounts of our taxpayer money, which is getting blown up in the process, right? So there is a need to efficiently convert power. And that is where researchers, scientists, and engineers such as myself can look into finding different ways of doing it. And scientists and researchers found some other materials other than silicon, which could do this. And they discovered it, they commercialized it, made it, and so on and so forth. And as an engineer, what would I do? During my research, I thought this is wonderful material called gallium nitride, like with 100 times superior material properties compared to silicon, right? Now, within all those variables we discussed, see, we are human beings. We are trying to make everything smaller, faster, denser, lighter, let's say. But as a human being, we want everything for cheap, right? We want it to be less expensive, and we want the best quality. So as an engineer, what do you do? That's a very complicated problem, and we have to achieve this efficiently, effectively, within the sustainability and green energy demands and so on and so forth. So I looked into how can we ensure that we can make a power converter meeting all these demands. And so what I did was to look into this gallium nitride, abbreviated GaN, devices. How can I put that into real systems to make your phones or laptops or anything work, right? So essentially, as an engineer, blowing up GaNs was a major part of my work, trying to put that into circuits that were made of silicon and trying to compare and contrast and understand the challenges and so on and so forth. So once you get a working prototype, what do we think as an engineer? For engineers, see, the big difference between science and engineering is that engineers want to not just use the science, but use it to make the society better, to make a practical, a real life impact for people, millions across the globe. So how can I do that? That is, you have to be able to mass produce this, commercialize it, or scale it up. And that is where I hit the another barrier and realized that it is very difficult to commercialize gallium nitride, to translate from the laboratory place to the real world was essentially what the crux of my work was. And I decided to use machine learning and artificial intelligence techniques to better understand gallium nitride. See, as an engineer, I am not a physicist who needs to know the intricacies of the beautiful electrons and all that happens inside anything, right? I just need to understand it enough to make it work and work really well. So artificial intelligence was a great tool to enable simulating. That means trying to make it work without actually having to build it, because it saves time and effort and it gives an understanding of how things will work. And so I introduced that into my gallium nitride based research, and I implemented gallium nitride, or designed, developed, and demonstrated gallium nitride based models using artificial intelligence and so on, so that engineers can have a better control over the process of designing, building, blowing up, understanding, finally building back better. So there is that process of iteration, experimentation, and finally getting that real life working product. So that is what I do on a daily basis in this fascinating world of electrical and electronics engineering. And also parallelly, because I'm an entrepreneur as well, I have built an artificial intelligence-based platform alongside my brother in the educational tech space. So artificial intelligence and machine learning, it's all about data and having that information about how things have been working and how you can use that information to enable the future, to better understand the future. So creating a platform which will help vulnerable youth be connected to the digital world is also something that I have parallelly pursued. And that is also bringing my engineering skills, not just the technical skills, but also what people do not realize is that engineering is a profoundly creative endeavor where you not just have to solve a problem, but you need to find, define, and then find creative ways of solving a problem. So most of the times the problem can be solved in a million ways. So I think it is an engineer who brings that ingenuity in solving the problem in the most effective, efficient manner for the betterment of society.
AI is such it's so difficult to kind of really grasp how it works. So how does AI work in addition to the already complex research that you've done?
So yeah, like I mentioned, right? So how I look at artificial intelligence in a very simple manner is, so it is trying to understand or simulate how our brain or our thinking works. So for us, or for me particularly, it was, okay, you have a lot of ways in which the switch was going on and off within the parameters of the electronics world. And if we can understand how a particular switch works in millions of different situations, we capture that data, we store it, we process it to be able to better use it. And then when you have a very different GAN device, because devices or switches can be made in hundreds of ways. So you capture that data about one device, and then you bring in another device, then you are able to, obviously, after you have enough data, you can extrapolate how this particular device might work. So this is exactly like, imagine you are a kid, right? And you see a cat. Are you growing up? You're just a few years old, and you see a cat, and someone obviously would have told you that this is a cat as a baby. Now, when you grow and when you see other types of cats around you, you still are able to identify that it is a cat, because your brain is able to store that identifiable information about your cat somewhere within the structure of our neurofunctioning, and that is data. So every single second, we are taking in subconsciously millions and trillions of amounts of information, and we are storing it in our heads. So I am looking at Shini, for example, her features are being stored in my head, and that is how her visual impression is stored, right, as data. We don't do that consciously, we do that very subconsciously. And what artificial intelligence has been trying to do is to try to emulate and simulate that working in a very technical context. And that's exactly why it is hugely impactful, because human brain is one of the most complicated and incredible missionary, like I would say, that is around. And that is why we are unable to fully entangle how it works. So within the knowledge of what we, or the scientists across the globe knows, is how they are trying to define and make artificial intelligence work for humanity. I think from very small things to hugely or astronomically complicated things, it has the power to extrapolate. And I think that is where, to be able to use that information for understanding, for making stuff better, is where artificial intelligence, to me, is hugely attractive. I was forced to study in an engineering college that was very close to my house or home, because my father did not really see the value or meaning in sending a female to study elsewhere, right? So I just studied in a engineering college very close to my home, but it was called the Cochin University of Science. It was under the Cochin University of Science and Technology, and it was called Cooperative Institute of Technology. It was a government-owned institute of engineering. And
it's pretty amazing then that you went from these kind of maybe lesser known academic institutions to then end up in Cambridge. I mean, it's quite amazing.
Thank you, but I would personally look at it as, it was, if I had a choice, I would have chosen the best education that I could get, like in intellectually vibrant and challenging and inspiring and motivating places. But it was because I did not have a choice, you see. So I was always, as a kid, you do not have a choice anyway. And while I was growing up, at least, 10 decade ago, it was a much, if your family is conservative and the society is on the borderline of orthodox, just trying to find its voice, slowly coming into the modern, or trying to understand the modern language of freedom and identity of a female. So I was just in that time frame of my life where I did not have that choice then. And by the time I reached, or I was out of my college, I did realize that this is not, I knew it, but I did not fight for it until then. And it was only during that time that I really started being assertive about where I wanted to study and so on. So I always wanted to study in these kind of institutions. And as you can see, so from CUSAT to SRM University, and then, so my exposure will slowly start to increase. So from Kerala to Tamil Nadu, which was the #1 private institute then in India, and it just opened up my exposure. And from there to National Institute of Technology, and from there to IIT Delhi, actually. And so it's gradually I will try and break open that barriers. And from IIT, when I was there, it was the faculty there who said to me that you should apply abroad because your CV like really stands out. And it is just with that line of motivation that I resigned and came back and started just with Google as my friend, started applying abroad. And I had no knowledge of how to go about doing this 1 year long of procedure to Cambridge or Oxford. And just like really worked hard with Google. And also I had to keep it as a secret, because if my extended family get to know, it would, or the neighbors or anyone, it would just add to the complexity of being able to actually pursue this. So when I started applying, I just made a list of the top 20 universities I could apply to. And my parents said, America, US was definitely out of the option because PhD would take more years. I've already done 4 years of bachelor's and 2 years of master's and so on. And so that's the only reason why I applied to Europe. And I got into Cambridge, Oxford, Edinburgh, Manchester, all with scholarships. And I even got into Manchester with their dual scholarships of not just a department, but also the university-wide scholarship. And I took up Cambridge, you see, just because, even though my scholarship, the Nehru Cambridge University scholarship, will only be actually half the amount of Manchester. Just beyond engineering and the fact that it is one of the greatest universities in the world, it is also because of who I am and where I come from, right? I was always denied the best. So I wanted to choose the best when I had the option to, when I had the freedom to.
Gosh, I mean, you must have had to have fought against so much. I mean, you must have had to really fight for what you deserved, because it's incredible. I mean, when I think of my own parents, they would have turned themselves inside out if I'd been accepted into Cambridge. I mean, they would be the people that were pushing me to apply for those kinds of universities. To think that you had to keep it in secret, I mean, I just don't even understand how that could have even been a thing. I mean, is it so strong to suppress women? Is that what you were fighting?
Because see, that's the thing, right? Like most of the people, like do not understand, because I think when you look at my journey, it seems like, oh, that's, like you had the aptitude, you were in this household, which is manufacturing a household. So everything looks like it came very natural and very easy to me. No, it was, I think, my struggles and barriers were mostly to break open and overcome the emotional and the hierarchical, the patriarchal, and the societal stereotypes and walls that were built around me, that are very strongly built around me. And it was not just me as a person. So if I look back at my school days and my college days, it was only very recently after the females in my group, after they got married, they had kids and so on, that they have like really ventured into the outside world of education and so on, right? Nobody really during those times came outside or traveled to pursue a degree, for example, of all the things. I think there was a lot of resistance, particularly because when you're not married, it is like, okay, you give your kid a good education. And my parents were both graduates themselves. They were really like, I think, outstanding students. So that is, obviously I have to thank my genes. So many things comes from there, but it's also that they were people of their times, right? Like we talk about Charles Darwin. Some people are just people of their times. They want to follow the societal rules and the unsaid, unwritten rules.
So apart from defying convention by getting yourself into Cambridge and Oxford and going abroad, and how else did you defy convention? Like, because I know in Southeast Asian families, there's a real emphasis on getting married, having children, that whole thing. Did you follow that as well as pursue your education?
No, I didn't actually, because I think maybe because I was repressed. I was always like, had to fight my way. So I did not actually. Some people think, oh, I am trying to be a rebel and trying to make a point by not marrying and so on and so forth. It's not that. It's just that I personally have always felt, and I think it was a reading that have helped. I was someone who was just in a room, in a house, in a very conservative, borderline orthodox environment. It was reading that actually opened my world to the possibilities of the world, to put it in a better way. And I've always believed that marriage and choosing a life partner and so on and so forth should happen when you want it to happen, when you feel like you are, you have someone you can share that journey with. And I think you also have to be a bit lucky to be able to come to that decision. But I never wanted that to be something that was forced upon me, because I am a female and I have to carry that family tradition and pass my gene onto the world and so on and so forth. So those kind of things have never appealed to me personally. And yeah, so not just breaking or defying conventions to do education, and not just masters, because everyone in our family had an undergraduate education. So I think doing that master's, doing that PhD, and doing a postdoctoral fellowship, I just took that to the zenith of what was possible. But also I had broken free and I've paved a way, because I'm the oldest in my entire family, if you look at my father's side and my mother's side. So I broke open and I like carved a path for the younger generation to follow. And actually, after I did that, no one really got married after their undergraduation, for example. People went on to do a post-graduation, people traveled, people, irrespective of their gender. So I think when I was making that decision, I never thought in my head, oh, I should be a trailblazer, right? It is, you don't plan for these things, but in looking back, you're like, okay, so the one decision that you have made actually I've always seen that as breaking the fabric of my family and my extended family, but it has actually empowered and motivated and inspired the younger generation to do what they think is right and best for them, irrespective of their gender.
I really am very inspired by that, and I really relate because I think I've broken a lot of conventions in my own family because there was a huge expectation to get an education, but at the same time there was a massive expectation to do what my parents' generation wanted, which was to settle down and have a family. And I've always actually really struggled to figure out how those two ambitions can coexist. I guess my question is, how has it sat with you being a bit of a rebel? Like, how do you feel within yourself being unconventional?
That's actually a very good question. And I think that's something I have struggled with till very recently, let's say, because you have taken yourself out of the realm of what's familiar, what's emotionally, that's the biggest emotional bond that you have had for the first 25 years of one's life and so on and so forth, because I was there with them. And I still am hugely like emotionally connected. I am someone who talks to my mom every single day, and we talk about anything and everything and so on. But I have gone through that phases where I was that very quiet kid who would just lock up in her room trying to figure out how do I escape this, right? So I think that was always there in my head, right? How do I, or to put it positively, how do I get things that I really want? Very simple. So I think I was always getting things that others thought was right for me and which I didn't possibly agree. But having said that, I think, I'm also fortunate in some ways to be able to get that education, to be able to get the best education within my hometown and so on and so forth. So I've tried to look at the positives of it and moved forward. But it was always that expectation of that people will always tell me, because, like I said, I was a topper from my nursery to whenever I left education. So I was always in the cream and top, and people have always come and asked me, why do you have to study so hard? Or why do you have to do this? Because you're at the end of the day going to be someone's wife and someone's mother. And why does it, why does being the best matter? Because and traditionally there was always the stereotype, the best student in the class would be a female, and then she would end up being in the kitchen, in someone's kitchen, and that's it, life over. And I have to say that was a big fear in my life, that my mother also was very academically good. And even though she had a graduate degree and she wanted to do more in life, she didn't, and she couldn't. And I think my best thing that I have realized was always from a young age, I think, is to try and understand from other people's experience. So whenever people have said, oh, you can study even after you marry and so on and so forth, I've never taken that into my head and thought, oh, that's a really positive thing. Let's try and do that. I think I was always a data person. I have looked around. From my lived and shared experiences, I have seen that you have to be really lucky for that to happen. And I did not want to take a chance with that, because I was more like, and again, it is dependent on another person, another family, see? So I thought I will not go into that path. But so at every juncture, you're trying to reason with yourself of why you want to break open, why you want to break the barriers, because you're not just breaking barriers, you're breaking emotional bonds forever sometimes, right? So you are taking a huge risk of being the loner, having to do this alone, and so on, having to embark and carry on a journey where you may or may not be successful. in your pursuit. So I've tried to reason myself, and at every juncture of my life, it has been an emotional battle, because most of the times when you have lots of barriers, other barriers at work and in your profession, you realize you're very alone in that journey, just because you are not doing something that everyone else have done, and you don't have too many people to relate to. And even when I had my supervisor leave at Cambridge, most people have told me, and not anything to do with me, but people have told me, yeah, that's because, why do you want to be in this position? Why you had a good life back. You could have married and you could have gone on, and this is not life. And I think the biggest struggle I've had is to understand, what do I really want from my life?
And what is the answer to that question?
And the answer to that question is that it is okay to not want what everyone else wants. And it is okay to have different wants at different time frames of your life. And it's not that I do not want to have a family. And like you said, being brought up in a conservative, in a very highly orthodox in some cases kind of environment, I've had to find and forge and break open the repressed identity to carve a path for myself. But having said that, even though I had my education at Cambridge and moving on to Oxford and so on and so forth, my parents have always wanted me to be with someone within the same culture, within all those variables and so on. So you see, life moves on. And I've always battled with the fact that, especially when you're in a developed country, you see people getting everything very fast in life, right? Because they have the freedom to experiment with what they want, and they have experiences, and they will make decisions probably within the same time frame as I did. But for the first 20 years or odd years of my life, I did not have that choice. So I would say my life was running late compared to my peers in the modern Western world. So I've also had to always look at other people. Okay, they're all settled, they've got their house, their cars, their family, their kids, but I've just started out. So I think I'm also emotionally, I'm a human being at the end of the day. So I've also battled with where do I stand within that social, societal frame. And also as someone who does a lot of outreach and public engagement and being in the limelight, I always get this question, or there'll always be some other female who tell me, oh, you've achieved a lot, but you see, I have a kid. And sometimes in those technical conversations, you are being made to feel less successful or less important or less of a woman because you are not a mother. So I would say there are multiple battles that you fight every single day with yourself, with your own beliefs, with your own systems, and with your own decisions. And I have now come into peace with that, because, if you look around the world, there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of tragedy, there's a lot of loss, pain, and agony. And I think not being able to find my space and voice during a very early period of my life is not a tragedy, right? It's not too bad. So I think I put things into perspective, and I've acknowledged that I could not have controlled who I was born into or where I was born into. And these are things that was totally beyond my control. And I look back and I look at me now, and I think even as a kid, I was someone who never liked to be told what to do, but I still always had to follow someone or something. So now just having that freedom to be able to do what I want at a time that I want in my own space and within and creating a world for my own, I think, that is my biggest achievement. So having that space and voice, irrespective of my gender and my identity and my economic and social status, is my biggest achievement. And it doesn't matter if people in my age have things that are very different to what I have. And it doesn't matter what others tell me. I think as long as I'm comfortable and happy um, with what I have, from what I was to what I am, I think that's what matters. But I will not lie and say that, oh, this is what I've always wanted. Like I've always wanted this, but I wanted other things as well. And I think it is that acknowledgement that there's no perfect family, there's no perfect career, there's no perfect education. You have to find your trade-off. Like as an engineer, I think that's where I think personally, I have been able to bring my profession of engineering into my personal life as well. I've always say I've engineered my or I am engineering my destiny. But as an engineer, you look at all the variables and you are trying to make the best possible use of resources within the constraints of what's available to you, and trying to navigate that journey, right? Trying to engineer my journey within that landscape of technology, teaching, enterprise. And yeah, there are emotional barriers and setbacks and so on and so forth. And I think, Shini, it is, these conversations like that, which is hugely important as well, because there are times where you will feel, oh, I'm a loner, I'm alone in this world. Why is this happening to me? What did I deserve to be like this? And there is also have it all phenomenon, or have it all trend, right? I have it all. I have a career, I have a family, I have kids. And I think that's hugely with the social media and with the general society where it's moving that have it all. And I think you have to define what is have it all for you. You have to define what is balance of life for you, because like I said, everyone's background, you are what your education experience and your environment is. My environment is very different from someone who has been in the Western world with that freedom and so on and so forth. And even someone from India who's in a very different family setup. So I think we need to think like an engineer. Actually, that's what I did. Nowadays I think very much like an engineer, and I look at all the variables and I think, Nikita, is there any way you could have engineered a different life for you? And I don't think so. And that's how I make my peace with it.
Oh my God, I completely relate to you, like 1,000%. It's so good to hear you talk to yourself about defining yourself, because I've been through the exact same thing. And I totally understand what you say when you're talking about sort of feeling like you're behind other people, because, I meet women who are the same age and have so much more. And I just think, how did that happen? How did I get to this age? And I've never been married and I've never had children. And it's because of all the energy I expended in my earlier years to get to this point. And, it's admirable. When I look back, it's admirable what I have been through to get to where I am today. But people don't look at that. It's not taken into consideration. It's very much, the Facebook profile, what you have today, have you ticked all the boxes? And I too have felt less of a woman because I don't have children, and I still, there's technology out there where you can freeze your eggs and you can, all this technology that can allow you to have it all. And I've just felt like those kinds of options are not for me, because ultimately I want the things in my life to come from a really authentic place of love. Like, I wouldn't want to just have a child so I can tick a box. I want to have a child because I'm with the man that I love and we want to start a family. And, so I have all these kinds of values. Yeah. And what's been really amazing listening to you is that you sound like you're in that space of accepting yourself for who you are. And I think that is so ultimately what it's about. It's really about loving the skin you're in, owning your journey, having compassion for what you've been through and what you're going to go through, you know, the obstacles in your future, what you've learned from the obstacles from your past. And it's just really beautiful to see that self-acceptance in somebody. Like, you've really inspired me today, because I think often I am troubled. You know, I've achieved a lot in my life, but I'm often troubled with looking at people and feeling inadequate, instead of actually looking at myself and just saying, Shini, you've done a lot, you know, you should be proud. And if there's one take-home message from everything that we've discussed today, it's that. It's, you know, and we come from, you know, Asian roots where it's very much about looking inwards, you know, philosophies, religions in those parts of the world are very much about looking in and self-reflection. And it's so beautiful to be able to talk to you about this, because I know that you get it. And I really resonate with everything that you've been saying. So refreshing to, because, you know, we are in a Western world now. And so often the cultures that we're in today don't understand these deep rooted ideas and concepts that we've been raised with, even if we are in the West and going to Oxford and Cambridge and all these impressive things. Like, you know, fundamentally in our DNA, we're raised with these different values. And so I guess final question, because, you know, we've been talking for a long time now, and I wish I could talk to you for hours more, and I hope we stay in touch, actually, because I would love to.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you so much. You are speaking my mind as well, because just very quickly about the kid thing, right? This is exactly the same reason for me. I do not want to have a kid just because I am a woman and if biologically possible, I can have a kid kind of thing. So I want to, if I can have a family. And for me, I think it's about that value system. It's about bonding, and it's about, and so many other things, right? Which you've already talked about. So it's really good to just share that with someone who thinks exactly alike.
So bringing it back to engineering then, with all of that in mind, that, you know, defining who we want to be and carving out our individual paths, with the work you're doing today, how are you making a difference through engineering?
So I think with the work, I'm in multiple ways in my day-to-day job of being a lecturer in electronics and the lead in innovation and all that. I am trying to transform the way engineering is being taught. I'm trying to help develop a learning model which is inclusive, which is interdisciplinary, immersive, and integrated, so that students of today can be well-rounded engineers of value to society. And with all the other stuff that I do, I think just encapsulating the ethos of being able to inspire youngsters to understand what really engineering is, and to be able to help them develop their skills, to help them identify their skills and attributes and who they want to be. Because I personally believe that who you are defines the kind of engineer that you would want to be and would turn out to be and evolve to be, because your experience and your education and your environment creates the engineer that you are. and it would define how and where and what you would want to do in this world. So how can you be the difference in the world by being an engineer? It's very much dependent on who you are as a person as well, not just what you learn technically. So I try and work with young people on many different levels to help them understand themselves better so that they can be engineers of value to society.
This conversation was kind of attitude changing for the better. So thank you so much for your time, and keep up the amazing work.
Thank you very much, Shini, and my pleasure. It was a delight catching up, not just for the book of professionally, but just knowing you and just connecting. So I feel it's like I've seen something very similar to me, and it's wonderful to have that feeling of belonging, I think, of sisterhood and so on. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing, and I wish you all the very best with your book and with all the other initiatives.
Thanks for listening, and please do subscribe to this podcast and maybe even rate and review it if you can. The more ratings and reviews, then the more interest from those trusty algorithms, which could help to increase the reach of this show. And you can watch the video recording of this conversation on YouTube on my new series called Esteemed. It's all about self-discovery, self-evolution, and inclusivity on innovation. Let's all strive to be in the best versions of ourselves and celebrate others being themselves too. As always, be kind and loving, and I wish you all a great week.